Today I'm going to talk about how to tell if you're an atheist. In my other role as a researcher on consciousness in the brain, one of my favorite phenomena, but I've never actually witnessed it directly, is Anton syndrome, which is a variety of anosognosia. This is where a patient has a serious problem and is completely unaware of it, completely oblivious of the problem. There are a variety of different cases of anosognosia, but probably the most extreme is Anton syndrome, which is also known more informatively as blindness denial. Now, these are people who have been just struck blind. They've had sight all their lives. They have recently been struck blind by some cerebral accident, and they don't realize it. They're blind, and they do not know that they are blind. They deny it, and they carry on, noticing that they're having some problems, but they don't think it's blindness. Well, as I said, I've never actually seen it firsthand. It's rare, and it usually lasts only a few days or weeks. And I have a standing invitation or request to various people in the field who might get an Anton's case. Call me up, send me an email, I'll be on the next plane, because I really want to see it firsthand. I have some hunches about how to think about it and how to interact with people that are suffering from Anton syndrome. It's hard to believe that it's possible. A lot of people I know, I've had students, when they hear about it first, they think I'm making it up. They just don't think it's possible for somebody to be blind and not realize it. Well, it is possible, and these people are not stupid. They're not insane. They're just victims of some sort of brain disorder. Well, now, that's just to introduce my topic of today, which is a much more common affliction: atheism denial. I think we all know people who deny that they're atheists, and we're not so sure that they realize what they really are, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I've been talking about this recently with Linda Lascola. Linda and I, as many of you know, have been conducting some research on the curious and important and unstudied category of preachers with parishes who are secret atheists or non-believers. And we found, thanks in part to Dan Barker, we found 5 that we actually found 6 that we interviewed for our first study. One of them got cold feet, and we completely expunged all the facts about her from our study. We published one about the first 5, and now we're into phase 2, which we're just about completing. Linda's done a whole lot more interviews. We're going to be writing it up probably this summer or in the fall, and probably publication in this calendar year. And let me just take this opportunity to thank those who've supported it. We always need more support. We don't have support for phase 3 yet, which will be a more grand study yet. But talking with Linda about what we were finding, and she's doing all the interviewing, and she noticed this pattern. We all noticed this pattern. We both noticed this pattern, that many of our preachers, even though they volunteered for this study, didn't want to call themselves atheists. And in fact, we recently placed an ad in the National Catholic Reporter. I was surprised that they took the ad, quite frankly. The Boston Pilot, which is another publication, refused the ad and wouldn't say why, but the National Catholic Reporter published it just a few weeks ago. And I'm going to point out one little passage there where it says, mismatch between what they believe about God and faith and what their parishioners expect them to believe. We couldn't say atheist, because they wouldn't accept that. But there's many pastors who are only too willing to acknowledge that what they believe in their heart of hearts is not what their parishioners think they believe. And that is a source of real anguish to them, as Dan Barker was mentioning earlier. Now, it's very hard then for some clergy to say that they're atheists. Now, in this group, that must seem pretty surprising, except we all know why, or we think we do. Isn't it obvious? There are terrible connotations, at least in America, of the word atheist. And there's the cognitive dissonance. They're supposed to be people of God. And probably one of the biggest is what's known as the Concord fallacy, or sunk costs. When you've invested most of your life in something, turning away from that and deciding that that was not a good investment, it's very hard to do. The tendency to throw good months and years after bad is very hard to resist. Now, we atheists don't feel this way. We don't have any difficulty saying that we're atheists. But in fact, today I'm going to be talking to two audiences, to this audience here today, and also to the audience that I anticipate in due course once these talks get out on the web. And I think, in fact, there are a few quiet, secret Christians in attendance here, and I'm talking to them too. So I'm talking about us and those who are curious about us. I'm talking to us and those who are curious about us. As you know, we atheists are a happy lot. We're deeply moral, but we don't have a mountain of artificial guilt. We do feel guilty about our misdeeds, but we don't consider them sins. Well, how about you, then? Might you be an atheist out there? Might you be an atheist? There's an American comedian, Jeff Foxworthy, whose main shtick is, you might be a redneck. These are redneck jokes. He's the poet laureate of redneck jokes. You might be a redneck if you've been married 3 times and still have the same in-laws. You might be a redneck if the centerpiece on your dining room table is an original signed work by a famous taxidermist. And there's a lot more. You can find them online. They're pretty good. One of the things I like about them is that although he's making fun of rednecks, it's a sort of affectionate fun. And I don't think the rednecks mind. Interesting fact. So now I want to sort of follow in Jeff Foxworthy's shoes a little bit and say, well, you might be an atheist if you're reflective enough to be curious about us. So if you're listening to me now somewhere, you might be an atheist. Before you quick move to another website, I'd like to point out that you might be an atheist if you're afraid to listen because of what you might learn about yourself. That pretty well covers everybody, I think. So let's get down to some details. Richard Dawkins, in the Christmas issue of the New Statesman, reported on a wonderful survey that he recently completed. That is to say, his foundation had this done by professional surveyors. He points out that the census of 2001 seemed to show that over 70% of British people were Christian. And the Dawkins Foundation commissioned a survey done by the Ipsos Mori group in accordance with its strict rules. So this was a carefully done survey. And this is what they found. That percentage that describes themselves as Christian had dropped in the UK from 72 to 54%, plus or minus 2. That's a very significant drop. You could read about it in Richard's article. I don't know how much it was otherwise publicized in England. More interestingly, of those 54% census Christians, that is, these are the ones that are identified by this methodology as Christians, half of them hadn't attended a church service at all in the previous year, 16% hadn't attended in the past 10 years, further 12% had never done so. So this has pared the group down quite interestingly, I think we'd have to say. Even more important, only 44% of the census Christians, less than half of that 54%, claim to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Now, I want to highlight that, and I want to amend it very slightly. Only 44% of census Christians say they believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And I'm sure you share my suspicion that a great many of those who say that are thinking sotto voce, well, in a sort of metaphorical and symbolic way, yes. They don't literally think that Jesus is the Son of God. How could you believe that? It's interesting that 56% don't bother with the symbolic or metaphorical dodge. They just say, no, I don't believe that. So we're paring it down a little bit more. So now I want to ask you out there, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? If not, you might be an atheist. Now, every Christian out there knows that there are lots of Christians, literalists, fundamentalists, who would say something stronger. They'd say, you're an atheist, not you might be an atheist. But you see, I'm more tolerant. I only say you might be an atheist. A few more questions. Do you believe that God literally listens to prayers and intervenes in people's lives? If not, you might be an atheist. Do you believe that God is on our side in war or in football games? Or if not, you might be an atheist. Do you believe that God created all creatures great and small? If not, you might be an atheist. Well, I know what some of you out there are thinking, not in this room, but in the wider world. You don't believe any of that nonsense, about Son of God and taking sides in football games and all that. But still, you say, you believe in something divine. Not a personal God, not a God that makes the creatures and that answers the prayers, but still something divine, a sort of benign force. I think I get it. May the force be with you. But I believe that Star Wars is a fantasy. How about you? Oh, I got to tell a little story. I do some radio interviews, and once with a Christian radio station, the interviewer was just beside himself talking with me, and he said, wait a minute. Are you telling me that you don't believe that there's some force that governs the whole universe and protects our lives and all the rest? And I said, oh, I do. And he got very excited. He said, you do? And I said, yeah, I do. I really do. I call it gravity. It doesn't make me a theist. At least I don't think so. Here's another common dodge. Not a dodge, a common response. What God is a concept. It's a concept in people's minds. It's a concept that enriches their spirits and inspires them. If you believe this, you're definitely an atheist.